so important. And this is something I've talked with my husband about more than once, Mark, this idea of how important the emotional safety is for a man. And if you think about it, so you've just described really well the journey of a man through kind of the competitive world and trying to figure out his place and proving himself and not being able to share emotions, or he'll look weak, or he'll be called this name or that name. And when my husband and I have talked about this, one of the things he's talked about is out there in that competitive world that you've so aptly described, they don't necessarily have a lot of outlets to share what's going on inside, their hopes, their dreams, their fears, their failures, their disappointments, the things that they're almost afraid to say to somebody else because they're going to be laughed at or they're going to be called names. And the one place that they potentially do have an outlet for sharing those aspects of themselves is within the context of an intimate partnership, relationship, or marriage. And so if that woman is not able to receive that or have a container for that is safe, and like you said, men can sense that sometimes very, very early on, or it's going to be a competition with her rather than a partnership with her, then it's going to repel. It's going to have a repelling force with men.
Yeah, I can share a couple of examples of what I've actually experienced if it's something that interests you. So I'll give you two examples. One's a much more extreme example and one's a much lighter example, but both were kind of the same thing. I had a client once that came to me and she said, Mark, I've had to be strong all my life. And so it's pretty graphic what she talks about. I'm going to share it now. She said, you know what? I had to be strong. Had 2 kids. My husband was murdered. Had to get through that. Had to move away. Had to look after business. Had to take care of myself. Right. And then I came here and I'm still doing it. I'm still taking care of myself. I've got to rely on myself. That's it. That's how it is. And she came to me with the presenting issue where she said, well, Mark, I'm not getting past second dates. Like, I'm just not getting the attraction that I want. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting because I said, well, are you sharing your story on dates? Tell me what's going on these dates. And she later on said, yeah, I tell my story just like I told it to you then. And it's so interesting that often at work or even in a bigger context like she experienced, if something big happens that you need to survive, you do need to dismiss feelings and emotions to get through it, right? Her husband was killed, like literally murdered. And she had to just get on with it. She had a job, to be at. She had 2 kids to take care of. She moved countries. You can't sit in a sadness pit when, you have to survive. And it's the same at work. A lighter example is, hey, you're having a shocking day, but you still got to go to work and perform, right? You've got to often compartmentalize emotions in life for performance and survival reasons. But for this client, the chronic habit of doing that, she'd kind of done it with everything. And then on her dates, when she came out and told the story, just like I told it then, the truth is men are listening to that and they're like, well, I respect the shit out of you for doing that. But Jesus, if you don't even feel sad when your husband is killed or murdered, then compared to your sadness range is like this narrow. So anything outside of that range, I'm going to be the weakling in the relationship. You're going to call me the weakling. I got to be stronger and less sad than that. And that's scary as shit. No man could do that, right? She's had to be emotionally tougher than most men in that instance. So that's sort of a big, like a blanket example of how she was not communicating this safety, just because on the dates, the way she told the story, it was basically saying, I got to compartmentalize. Emotions will make me weak. I need to be strong, and strong is what I do for my kids and my family. And again, respect to her for doing that, right? But unfortunately, a man just can't feel safe with that. He's not going to.
Well, because there's no vulnerability there, so it doesn't allow for vulnerability in him.
Yeah.
She's not sharing it. She's sharing it from more of a factual, this is what happened kind of, that's the way she's portraying it. And yes, I mean, God bless her for having the strength to get through that. But the way she's sharing it's not opening any space for vulnerability from him to feel safe, to be weak at any time.
And if he's more vulnerable than her, he's the weakling.
Mm-hmm.
A smaller example that I think is also worth sharing, I once dated a woman and she was lovely. You know, she was attractive, she was witty, she was very intelligent. She had a ton going for her. And I just noticed that on a couple of dates, and we're actually friends now, still friends to this day, but it was sort of a little bit of dating energy to begin with. And I noticed on the couple of dates, she was a real kind of like sassy shit talker, right? So you kind of, you know, I might share something like, oh, I have a passion for this, or, oh, like, this is kind of a weird or concerning thing about the world. You know, I kind of express an opinion or a passion, something not particularly vulnerable, but a little bit getting there. And she was a shit giver. Now, that's fine unless you do it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to the point where what I recognized was going on was every time I was like a little bit vulnerable or like expressed something that made me a bit sad, like I'm worried that, I fear the day when my animals pass away, because she'd be like, oh, toughen up there, boy, you got this. It was like fun, and she wasn't like negging me or shaming me at all. But because she relied on play so much, I started to realize, and I only kind of figured this out afterwards, but I started to feel that she doesn't go to emotions, and her kind of adaptive mechanism was, I'm going to be a shit giver. I'm going to be the fun, the teaser. And again, that's great sometimes, but if you do that all the time, she could never kind of go there with me and never get into like, oh yeah, here's how I feel about that, or here's something that happened to me. That lack of comfort going there eventually made me feel like I was the emotional space compared to her, and a guy doesn't want to be both the physical and the emotional space.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't end up dating, and I found myself more attracted to women who held space wider. Not all the time, like it's not about doing this stuff all the time, and it's good to be able to sass someone up sometimes, but yeah, I found myself more comfortable with women who could go there and hold space for those conversations when they needed to.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I know you said this didn't really come across as mean, but the way you're describing it sounds like there was just a little bit of an edge, and like maybe
it was
her
like teasy. Yeah, like neggy, teasy, just a little bit of like, it was done in a fun way, but it was a little bit like, oh, harden up, boy, you got this. It was that, I'm trying to think of an exact example, but it was that kind of overly playful, slightly neggy vibe over and over again.
Yeah, well, and if you're expressing something like, I fear the day that my animals die, that actually is pretty vulnerable. And I think what a man would be looking for in that, in sharing something like that, would be a bit of compassion, or a bit of like kindness, or just more of a gentle reception for something like that.
Yeah, or a match. Sometimes the guy will lead a vulnerable story, but then, if you like him, match him. Be like, yeah, one of my fears is blank. And if that's like a level 5 for him, match him at a level 5, or try a level 6, and maybe he'll go to a 6 with you. You want to be able to kind of go there in that energy as well. And she just didn't seem to be able to access it, which, yeah, I think in hindsight was a bit of fear about those types of emotions and capacity for them.